Hello, I'm John Felt. Welcome to the weekly Water Outlook briefing recorded on February 3rd, 2013. Okay, now for some parts of the nation, it was a pretty busy week. Matter of fact, it was a major severe weather outbreak over parts of the Midwest and Southeast U.S., up into the Tennessee and Ohio River valleys and the mid-Atlantic states. The smaller graphics on the bottom of this frame showed the severe weather reports, with blue being wind reports, severe thunderstorm, and the red being tornado reports. Day one is the graphic on the left, and day two, this was a two-day event. You can see most of the tornadoes were reported on day one, but as it moved off to the east, you can see there were isolated tornadoes on day two as well, including the one in the northern suburbs of Atlanta. Now, if you look at precipitation, you see the heaviest precipitation in yellow, and that was around 2 inches. That generally ranged across the area from Birmingham up to the northern part of Atlanta, up into the spine of the Appalachians, and then some streaks in Missouri. And then look into the Great Lakes region. That region has definitely got some significant snow, not just over last week, but over the last couple weeks. Now, most of the middle part of the nation, with some exceptions, has been relatively quiet and dry. One of the active tracks has been the far northern tier of the U.S., and even though the amounts aren't that high, if you look at the percent of normal, you do see that it was more significant in that region, and that was in the form of snow. There's been a fairly significant area of snow over the northern plains over the last week or so. But look at the percent of normal over the middle part of the nation, from Missouri up into the Great Lakes region, and you can see that that was anywhere from 4 to 6 times normal. So that was the more widespread, heavier rain this past week. But there's also another band from the southern Appalachians up into the northeast U.S. that was above normal. I think what's really interesting here, if you look at all these streaks here, all these streaks, this is indicative of individual thunderstorm tracks. The line itself was moving from west to east, but the thunderstorms themselves were moving from southwest up towards the northeast. If I didn't know what time of year it was, I would think this would be spring, seeing these type of tracks. Normally in February, you get more of a synoptic type precipitation pattern, more widespread, uniform rainfall or snow. In this case, we had very strong thunderstorms producing severe weather. In addition to the severe weather, convective weather, we also received quite a bit of snow. You can see the area in green there, 8 to 10 inches of snow or more up in the Great Lakes region, and that extended down into the middle part of the nation, the mid-Mississippi River Valley, parts of Missouri, and even northeast Kansas. Secondary band of heavier snow along the Appalachians, and everywhere else, pretty much lighter amounts of snow. Now, if we look at the snow cover on the ground right now, the darker the shade of blue, the more significant snow. So much of that snow is lighter. The snow across Iowa is in that 4-inch range or so, a little bit higher. Then we get into the heavier snowpack. That's over parts of Wisconsin, Minnesota, and North Dakota. Now, the bottom image here, this shows the track or the percentage of the nation covered by snow. And you might remember I mentioned that we had over 60% on January 1st. Since that time, it's dropped very significantly, and I think now we're on more of a very slow increase. I wouldn't call that steady. You could, but it's actually, I think there's a slow increase there, especially this week, picking up a bit of extra snow cover across the nation. Now, from water resource perspective, it's not just the snow extent, even more so, it's the water equivalent of that snow. And this is something I'll be watching very closely to see how it's expanding. Right now, it's getting fairly significant, nearing 2 inches over parts of North Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin. But I think overall right now, it's probably below normal. That's something I'm going to do a little research on over the next week to start talking about the percentage of normal of water equivalent. But right now, I think it's fairly confined. But we will have to keep a very close eye on that for the potential for spring snowmelt flooding. Okay, so let's get into teleconnections. Teleconnections I use very extensively for the mid-range type forecasts. And so far, if I look at the Arctic oscillation this winter, there have been 4 pronounced periods, and I've indicated them 1, 2, 3, and 4. If you read my newsletter I just put out this past week, I mentioned that 90% of the winter so far has been negative as far as the Arctic oscillation goes. And that's number 1, number 3, and if you look at these periods here, especially number 1, very prolonged negative, 3, very prolonged, and 2, just slightly positive. So what's unusual here? Look where we're at. We're right here now. this is the most significant positive phase of the Arctic Oscillation that we've seen. And keep in mind that when it's positive, what we're seeing is that the Arctic vortex, or the very cold air, is being held up in northern regions by a very strong Arctic vortex, and it's not sinking south as much. So we have fairly distinct patterns. I'm going to mention later in the briefing, we'll see if this happens, but it looks like we're nearing the peak this week, and then it's going to drop down fairly rapidly. Now, that's hard to say if it'll actually do that, but that could change the precipitation patterns towards the end of the forecast period. I'll be talking about that in a bit. Now, another oscillation that I do talk about from time to time, I do not talk about this all the time, but I think it was somewhat significant recently, is the Madden-Julian Oscillation, or MJO. This is a bit more complex. It's both an Earth-ocean type oscillation, and what it is an area of enhanced precipitation or convection in the tropics that moves around the globe. And when it's identified, it's classified into one of 8 regions, and then this fairly complicated looking chart here, we plot where it's active. Now, if it's in this circle, it's weak, and the further it goes out, the more intense. So for quite some time, most of the winter was pretty weak, and then it started getting stronger in these regions 5, 6, 7, and now the forecast calls it for becoming a little bit less active. Now, when it's in these regions in the Pacific, 6 and 7, there's that possibility of impacting precipitation patterns over parts of the nation, parts of the northwest U.S., and even parts of the southeast U.S. I think what's been very interesting this winter is that there have been 2 times so far when I think there could have been an interaction with the MJO. And if you look at this past severe weather week, look at where the moisture came from. There was enhanced convection down in the Pacific, and it tapped it and pulled it well into the U.S., up into Missouri, Oklahoma, Missouri, and then eventually off to the east. Now, that typically really enhances precipitation, the potential for heavy rain. So why wasn't the rain all that heavy? Well, the reason was that instead of being more synoptic, it was more cellular with thunderstorms, and it was progressive. It was moving very quickly. So even though the hourly precipitation rates were 2 inches or so an hour, it was moving so quick that it just passed through maybe an 8 to 8 hour range or something in that order. So it just didn't linger as much. But it did have the potential when you get that Pacific moisture. Like I said, the MJO has been active, but it looks to me like it's going to be diminishing a bit as we get into the middle part of the month. Now, since it's still somewhat active, we're going to have to keep an eye on the southern branch of the jet stream, and that could bring us one more bout of more significant precipitation in this upcoming weekend. Now, I wanted to step back and sort of look at what are the big trends as far as precipitation over the last 30 days. This is a longer range, and these have been the hot spots so far, and I put points that are either very high stream flow or in flooding, or the squares there. But really, the active track has been Louisiana up into the Tennessee and Ohio River Valley, and then from Louisiana up into the Appalachians. That has really been the hot spot. And look how quick it's dropped off here. Very abrupt line from lots of rain to very little rain. But that's been the hot spot so far this winter. And sometimes when these patterns set up, they stay in effect for a while. So right now, it looks to me like that is actually going to be the continuing more active pattern. So we have 2 different types of vulnerabilities I want to talk about. One is the vulnerability for flooding, and this is the upper soil moisture content and estimate. The areas in blue are relatively wet, so if additional heavy rain would fall over those areas, there could be a greater risk for runoff and the possibility of flooding. The areas in red, it's a different type of vulnerability. It's pretty dry, and that area can actually take significant amounts of rain, especially over the far southwest and the central part of the U.S. It's very dry, still in a core of drought, and can use a lot of rain. So we basically have both wet vulnerabilities, vulnerabilities for flooding, and dry areas. Well, here is the jet stream as of Sunday. Now, what I'm showing you here is the jet stream as well as areas of mid and upper level moisture. So this is going to give some idea of the energy in the atmosphere and also the potential for precipitation. So as we start out the week, you can see that we have a digging area of low pressure, or trough of low pressure in the east. And then as we get through the middle of the week, this is getting towards the middle of the week, what I want to point out here is this area of green is indicative of that mid and upper level moisture that's streaming across the central and the eastern part of this nation. That's going to be the primary precipitation feature this week. I also want to point out here that if you look at the jet stream here, you see that by the middle of the week, it sort of straightens out. It's much more of a west to east flow than at the beginning of the week, and that's showing that that positive Arctic oscillation is really settling in through this week. The southern jet stream is a little bit more active, and we have the flow, like I said, from west to east. Now, if we go through the week, the area of green here, you can see that that very quickly moves through, and that's our chance of rain over the middle part of the nation and the southeast U.S. Some more lighter or moderate snow over the northern tier, and that's that pattern we've seen for quite some time now. So if I go out a little bit further towards the 5th of February, and then as I near next the late this week, what we see here is again a very strong west to east flow, a very strong progressive flow. This is going to keep moisture moving very quickly, lighter amounts of precipitation, and after that midweek system, it looks fairly quiet for the rest of the week until we get close to next weekend. Now, next weekend, I want to point out we have a stronger part of the southern jet developing. Here it is right here over the western U.S., and you can see it moves across the area over the weekend, and it brings, this is that chance of heavier rain from the Gulf Coast states up through parts of the southeast U.S., the Tennessee and Ohio River valleys. That's going to be a stronger system, and that'll be next weekend. Now, if I go out just a little bit further here towards the end of the mile run, you begin to see the jet stream beginning to bow from the north to the south, and that's the possible indication of another change from a positive Arctic oscillation back to a negative Arctic oscillation. Okay, so we looked at the changes in the jet stream, and it looks like there's going to be a midweek, early to midweek event, and then maybe next weekend a more significant event. But I wanted to point out the 8 to 14 day outlook because the trends or the probabilities of either below normal or above normal are fairly strong. And I wanted to point out that above normal precipitation is forecast over generally the east and well below normal over the west. And especially here, this is that snow track that's been very active. I think we're really beginning to see here an increasing snowpack in this region. And then in the area right in here, I've talked about this area as well. That's that vulnerability for flooding. So those are two of the areas I think as we get through the next 2 weeks, we're going to have to keep an eye on. Increasing snowpack over the north central through the Great Lakes, and potential for heavier rain and perhaps some more flooding over parts of the eastern U.S. as well as the southeast U.S. Okay, so as far as the 7-day precipitation forecast from the Hydrometeorological Prediction Center, this is the next 7 days going out through the week. You can see the heaviest rain where it's indicated if it's focused along the Gulf Coast. This is a combination of both the two rain events I talked about. I wanted to talk about the alignment of that second rain event. This is late in the week into the weekend, actually next weekend, and this shows that area that I'm a bit concerned about right now for the potential for some flooding if it does move from eastern part of Texas, northeast Texas, up through Arkansas up into the Ohio Valley. We'll be updating this through the midweek update as far as that, if this still looks like that will occur, but we do have to keep an eye on that. So the takeaway points from this week's briefing: midsection of the nation in the southeast is wet, and there are vulnerabilities for flooding. The mid part of the nation is dry, and there are dry vulnerabilities towards drought. It looks like a relatively modest precipitation event this week, but a more active possibility of a precipitation event towards the weekend. I want to also mention that that enhanced snowfall, more active snow over the northern tier of the U.S. and the Great Lakes looks like it will continue. Thank you for listening to this week's briefing. I will be updating this again next Sunday.